Morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Welcome to this very important conference, and we're looking forward to having a very informative and lively discussion this morning, later on this morning, and throughout tomorrow as well. My name is Fionnuala Sweeney. I have, for my sins, been an anchor at CNN International for more years than I care to remember, and also an Atlantic Fellow for Equity and Brain Health, which is a subject that is of great interest to me. And I'm particularly delighted to be able to be here today to moderate throughout today and tomorrow, and I hope that we can provoke some interesting questions and perhaps resolve a couple of situations too, and look for a way forward in this very important area of mental health and psychosocial support in crisis situations. This session is being live streamed, so please only share what you would like everybody in the world to hear. We'll have a few ground rules before we begin. We'd ask you kindly to switch off your mobile phones. And as we have these discussions today, please be mindful that we want to create an open space where people feel safe to talk about their experiences and perhaps any advice or wisdom they can bring to this particular topic and situation. We're also very, very conscious that when individuals talk about their own traumatic experiences in a crisis situation, that this may bring up memories for people listening. So we just urge you to sort of be gentle with yourself and be mindful that it wouldn't be necessarily unnatural to have some bad memories creep up again. But there is a quiet room, should you feel a little uncomfortable, where you can remain. And there is someone here who would be able to help you and would love to help you if you find yourself feeling a little uncomfortable. I'll ask Dr. Marjolien Wadjoud to stand up, please. She will provide support as needed. She's there, just one moment, at the back, yes, so that everyone can see you, waving her hand. Thank you very much indeed. And all staff members here in the hall know how to find her if you do feel the need to talk to anybody. So let me set the stage a little bit. You all know why you're here, why we're all here, and the importance of the objectives of this conference. We need to get mental health and psychosocial supports in crisis situations higher on the agenda, the political agenda in particular around the world. And this can be done by organising an annual event. We hope we can push this agenda forward. But we're here in a very, very, very beautiful building in Amsterdam, and here to talk us through it a little bit, tell us a little bit about it, and also some of the activities that take place in it, is the CEO, Mark Schneiders. Mark.
Good morning. Dear Minister Kaag, Your Excellencies, dear guests, all protocol observed. Welcome to KIT Royal Tropical Institute, and welcome to this beautiful hall which is named after our patron, Queen Maxima. I'm very pleased that this important and ambitious conference on mental health and psychosocial support in crisis situations takes place in our institute. KIT Royal Tropical Institute is the home of SDG House, a place where policymakers, entrepreneurs and experts work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Of these goals, SDG 3, good health and well-being, is particularly dear to us. KIT experts have been working on public health delivery, often in fragile contexts, for over a century. Thousands of health professionals from all over the world are graduates of our master program in international public health. Core to the SDG is the pledge to leave no one behind. And this is of particular relevance to this conference that aims to raise more attention to mental health and well-being, in particular for people who are hit by crisis, natural disasters and conflicts. They should not be left behind. Leaving no one behind is key to the work of KIT experts on a range of health issues, such as health system strengthening, universal health coverage. Evidence shows the need to integrate mental health into the overall health system. After all, there is no health without mental health. But we are well aware of the challenge of reaching out to the most vulnerable people during and in the aftermath of crisis situations. That is a challenge all of us are facing. Yet we are hopeful about opportunities for cooperation. By linking all involved in mental health and psychosocial support and working together, we believe we can respond to the urgent needs that exist. We are very grateful and honoured that KIDS Royal Tropical Institute and SDG House will provide a platform in the coming 2 days to accelerate these collaborations. I wish you all a fruitful conference with tangible results and a very pleasant stay here at our institute and in the city of Amsterdam. Thank you.
Mark Schneider's there. Of course, this conference was held in October of last year in England, in London, and the first Global Ministerial Summit is handing over to us here today as we begin this conference and these 2 days of debate. So I'd like now to introduce, if I may, Tim Kendall, who is National Clinical Director for Mental Health for the National Health Service, the NHS, in England, and he continues his work as a consultant psychiatrist for the homeless in Sheffield. And he is now going to take the stage and hand over from the first Global Ministerial Summit on Mental Health in London last year, where he chaired the steering group. Tim Kendall. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. 18 months ago, I was asked by our then Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt, to work with our partners, WHO and the OECD, to set up the first ever Global Ministerial Summit on Mental Health. We wanted to initiate a global international partnership to promote, shape and influence global mental health over the coming years. More specifically, we wanted to assert the right and the need for the treatment of mental ill health to reach equality with the treatment of physical ill health across the world, and to reach an international consensus to promote equality for mental health worldwide. Now, over the subsequent 6 months, which must have been the most frantically busy I recall, I chaired the steering committee and oversaw the organisation of, and finally opened and hosted the first Global Summit on the 9th and 10th of October last year. On a beautiful, warm and brilliantly sunny day in London, on the banks of the River Thames, opposite the British Houses of Parliament, which I'm guessing all of us have seen rather a lot of recently, we had nearly 600 delegates turn up from 47 countries, from a broad range of geographical regions and all levels of economic development, including 16 ministers, loads of policymakers, academics, tons of clinicians, but most importantly, 150 people with lived experience that we shipped in from all over the world. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Now, this is an explicitly political event. We wanted to build momentum on global mental health issues, such as tackling stigma, promoting investment, spreading access to evidence-based mental health services and treatments. We wanted to gain support for a global declaration committing us to, and our political leadership, to the future of mental health. And finally, we wanted to create a legacy, with summits being held annually, driving forward global action on mental health. And that's now being realised today. But these are early days. The fight for global equality for mental health has only just begun. We must continue on this radical path to dismantle the obstacles that prevent our societies from embracing mental health and from bringing mental health care and treatment into the 21st century. People with mental ill health have been marginalised, stigmatised, and all too often mistreated in every country in the world, quite literally for centuries. I'm relieved and pleased to be able to say that this is now changing, and I believe that the tide is finally turning. Now, I've been working as a clinician in mental health for 35 years, believe it or not, and my clinical work for the last decade has been with homeless people. Throughout these 35 years, and especially the last 10, I know how close trauma is to the emergence of mental health problems, especially when I am increasingly working with people from disaster zones, many of whom carry the pains of trauma, often over years, and I now see in England and probably across Europe increasingly on the street. So it is with great pride that I'm helping to open this second Global Ministerial Summit on Mental Health here in the Netherlands, and that this summit should be on the mental health and psychosocial support in crisis situations around the globe. And it is with great pleasure that I hand on the baton to Minister Kaag, who has championed this great event. Thank you.
Tim Kendall there, and he ended his speech by talking about Minister Kaag, who, of course, has put this on the agenda in a very, very short space of time. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is, of course, Dutch Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation. She's had a very long international career, beginning at Shell and then at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she worked for a long period of time at several United Nations agencies. And then in 2013 to 2014, she served as Under-Secretary General and Special Coordinator of the UN Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And then in May of last year, she announced that the Dutch government was going to prioritise mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings. And as I've said, she managed to get this quite high on the international agenda in a very short period of time. So it's my pleasure to introduce Minister Kaag. Thank you.
Well, I have to take a deep breath. The day's finally come. Excellencies, Peter Maurer, President of the ICRC, ladies and gentlemen, but above all, experts, experienced experts, friends and colleagues. This is a very important day, I believe, to all of you personally and professionally, but this is the day in which we change, in which we translate the talk into an action commitment to really serve all those who we don't even know, we may never know, but they're as important as anyone else that is close to us and dear to us. In the West, we have the privilege of knowing that mental health is important, and yet, as Tim Kendall has so rightly said, fairly ignored. The pain you can't see, you can't touch, is often the pain that is most difficult to heal for family, friends, and above all, of course, the person affected. But people in crisis situations are the most seemingly beyond reach because everybody is affected. And this is why I've decided if my ministerial role has to be worth something, this theme is something I want to deliver on. If you die today, this is the one, and I will leave with pride. But before this, I would like to refer to words of the war poet Wilfred Owen, who said, "Who are these? Who sit they here in twilight? He asked this question in 1917, at the height of the First World War, when he was being treated in Craiglockhart Military Hospital near Edinburgh. The facility housed officers, as you know, suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, at the time referred to as shell shock. Who were they? In Owen's words, "These are men whose minds the dead have ravished, murders they once witnessed, treading blood from lungs that had loved laughter. Always they must see things and hear them, batter of guns and shatter of flying muscles, carnage incomparable, and human squander." Today we may use different words to describe people affected by trauma, but we mean the same thing. We are failing them now as then. We fail to provide help to those whose minds the dead have ravished, whose lungs once loved laughter, whose souls have been tarnished by carnage, incomparable. And that's why we are all here today. We've convened this conference for those who are sitting in the twilight, the children and men and women branded by war and conflict, and our efforts today are for them, for their tomorrow. And I'm truly honoured to welcome you to Amsterdam. We don't have British weather, Tim. We have Dutch weather, as some of you have arrived yesterday. But for the opening of the world's first ministerial conference on mental health and psychosocial support in a crisis situation. This conference is urgent, and many of you come from countries or conflict settings where you live this and you know this day in, day out. It's necessary, it's needed. Sadly, it's also late. Countless conferences have already been organized on emergency aid, humanitarian access, medical assistance in crisis situations, or development cooperation, all necessary, but none on the issue that's on the agenda today. And I think that makes us pioneers of sorts, but this is an uncomfortable truth. It is a role that none of us would have sought. It's distressing, but also reassuring in equal measure. Distressing because despite all the resolutions that have been drafted and adopted, all the aid agencies that have been set up, and all the relief efforts that have been undertaken, this issue has never been given the status and priority it deserves. It's reassuring because you are all here today in your busy schedules. It means the tide is turning. And when I look around this hall, Queen Maxima Hall, I feel this sense of shared duty and commitment and duty to deliver towards our shared humanity. Your presence is a tribute to those who've long suffered in silence, and their voices have to be heard, so we might find words for what has previously gone unspoken. But what has gone unspoken doesn't go unnoticed. At least 1 in 5 people in conflict situations develops a mental health condition. Close to 40% of children in conflict zones, have severe emotional issues. 12% of the world's population lives in active conflict situation. Vital health care, mental as well as physical, is scarce in areas ravaged by conflict, in and out of camps or settings of internal displacement. At best, mental health support or access is a secondary concern, but usually it's unacknowledged, unaddressed. But this doesn't resolve any particular situation. Broken souls remain broken even after damaged bodies that house them have been healed. A terrible reminder of this fact is actually the suicide rates amongst veterans of conflict situations. They are significantly higher than amongst other groups, even when assistance has been provided. War's trauma endures long after the last bullet has been fired, and all too often, as we know, the very last step taken or bullet fired is a desperate act of self-harm. At a time when the number of conflicts around the world is increasing, when the numbers of internally displaced and refugees are growing, adequate mental health care and psychosocial support are needed. The quality of mental health care and psychosocial services in crisis response is, of course, still significantly lower than the quality of physical healthcare services. And even then, of course, we are not talking about the AAA package. We're talking very modest, inadequate, insufficient, and with that, the comparison with mental health care, of course, is very stark. And the amount of development assistance provided to mental health remains pitifully small. What we don't plan for, we don't ask for. Our collective failure to respond to this global health crisis results in a monumental loss of human capital. But above all, I believe it's also a significant dent in our human dignity and our shared humanity. We often say at conferences like these, and some of us are heading to the World Bank next week, that we believe in investing in human capital. But we seem to forget about the most important adjective in this part, human, what makes us human. So no longer will we build our efforts alone on rebuilding the bridges or providing that first aid. We need to acknowledge the soul. As much as I like our epitaph, Mind the Mind, I had wanted soul in our storyline, but I was outnumbered. But I will talk endlessly about the soul. We need to acknowledge that access is vital, essential, it's a human right, and from today we will coalesce and leverage our collective efforts to ensure we reach new heights. We scale up, we start, we invest, we make it happen. And we need to break the silence that still oppresses so many. The silence that lies very heavily on societies torn apart by conflict. Silence of shame, of unacknowledged, unnoticed suffering. So I'm truly touched, as I started my opening, that many of you are here at this time. And it's my sincere hope, belief, and certainly my personal commitment that this conference will not be one of many. It is the first of many to achieve what we set out to do. First steps are usually small, but usually the first one can be very significant. So let's not forget that. And as we can read in the Talmud, every person matters. Whoever saves a life saves the world. Let's go make that happen. Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. Every person matters, Minister Kaag there. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much, but because of the optimism that we have that these conferences will continue year after year, we'd like to hear from one of the representatives of France, which of course will be hosting the third Global Ministerial Summit next year. So it is my pleasure now to introduce Franck Bellevier. He was recently appointed Ministerial Delegate for Mental Health and Psychiatry at the Ministry of Health in France. And as I say, France will be hosting the next summit. And let's hear from him now. Thank you.
Our Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our Minister of Solidarities and Health, Mrs. MinBuZa, who is unable to attend, I have the great honor and pleasure to be here as the French representative. I would like first to thank the Netherlands authorities for organizing this international conference focusing on the vast need for mental health and psychosocial support for those in crisis situations. A need which, despite being essential, is too frequently neglected for the victims of conflict and natural disasters. This Amsterdam meeting will hopefully be seen as the tipping point in raising international awareness on this major issue. France, as a member of the Alliance, is fully behind this initiative, its objectives, and its conclusions. We completely support the idea that the mental health of vulnerable population must be based on multidimensional approaches and on increased cooperation between decision makers and actors in the countries and international organizations. I look forward for the inspiring program and the important work scheduled for today and tomorrow, and I am sure it will represent many significant contributions in addressing these major unmet needs. We in mental health must continue to push for greater awareness and resources in each of our countries and internationally. In France, this issue is now one of the top health priorities. It is set out in a pan-government roadmap that combines prevention, promotion of mental well-being, care pathways, social inclusion, as well as promotion of rights of people with mental disabilities. And whilst everybody here seeks to maintain the momentum from the first two summits, we in France are preparing to host the third World Meeting of the Alliance of Mental Health and Wellbeing in Paris on the 9th and 10th of October 2020. As the Ministerial Delegate for Mental Health and Psychiatry, I am in charge with setting up this event. Our ambition for next year is to build on the successes of the previous meetings, London last year and Amsterdam this year. Tomorrow, our ambassador, Mr. Louis Vassy, will be here to formally accept the baton on behalf of France. We are currently defining the central theme, which we hope to announce in the very near future. And we have already identified a triple objective. First, keep up the pressure by proclaiming once again that mental health is a global emergency that must bring together the largest number of countries calling for an urgent international mobilization. It must be based on the definition of a strategic vision of the Alliance. Second, encourage the sharing of good practices between countries. Third, consolidate deliverables with a discussion within the Alliance and a mobilization of partners, including financial. We will keep you informed, and we would like to thank the World Health Organization for all their current support. Our services are already mobilized to make Paris 2020 another great step forward in the Alliance promotion of mental health and the destigmatization of mental illnesses. I look forward to seeing you in Paris. Let us see how high we can climb on the shoulder of London and Amsterdam. I thank you for your attention.
Imagine you live in a small town. You have lived here all your life. You don't have much, but it is enough. Suddenly, your whole life is swept away in an instant. You have to run. And even when you reach safety, you can't stop thinking about your losses. It's nearly impossible to imagine the future. Of course you need food, water, and a roof over your head. But psychosocial support and perspective are just as important. Support can take different shapes. You may want to share your experiences. Some people need special care. Additional attention may help children to cope with their feelings, to gain trust and make friends. Extra measures can help you feel secure again. Worldwide, almost 70 million people have been forcibly displaced, the highest number in decades. More than 1 in 5 people affected by conflict have a mental health condition. They have lived through terrible experiences. Together we can and must do better. We need to combine our knowledge and strengths to give these people the urgent support they need. Mental health and psychosocial support is a necessity in any humanitarian response, essential to rebuild lives and societies.
Well, we are truly getting underway. We're looking forward to a very lively panel discussion in a matter of minutes, but it is my pleasure now to introduce the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer. Under his leadership, the ICRC carries out humanitarian work, as you know, in more than 80 countries, and his priorities for his presidency include strengthening humanitarian diplomacy, emerging states and other actors for the respect of international humanitarian law. He also wants to improve and make it a priority to improve the humanitarian response through innovation and new partnerships. Please welcome Peter Maurer. Thank you very much.
Dear Sigrid, ministers, colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. It's been encouraging to see the momentum building in the support of mental health in crisis situations. And I recognize the particular efforts of the Dutch government and, of course, of Sigrid Koch. Mental health services have for too long been an afterthought in situations of conflict, violence, and disaster. When traumas are invisible, they can be easily overlooked or deprioritized. Yet, war and disasters have devastating impact on the mental health and psychological well-being of millions of people. New mental health problems can appear and pre-existing conditions may resurface. For some, the effects will be life-threatening. In places affected by conflict, 1 in 5 people, we have heard, live with some form of mental health conditions. That's 3 times more than the general population worldwide. Figures like these give us an idea of the scale of the issue. But during this summit, I also encourage you to consider the individuals behind these numbers, the people who ICRC's teams regularly meet, like those living through sustained bombardment and shelling, the women, men and children raped, ostracized by their communities, the humanitarian workers coming under fire or facing the strain of enormous needs and limited resources. Last month, I was in Nigeria and saw the impacts of a 10-year-old conflict which has torn apart tens of thousands of families. Parents spoke of their deep anguish of not knowing what had happened to their children. They had been separated while fleeing attacks. Others were abducted or detained. Without answers, their trauma will remain an open wound. It is vital that we listen carefully to people's experiences, and I welcome the upcoming panel discussion where we will hear more in depth of these experiences. Despite the progress that has been made, we know the silencing effect of stigma, and we need to create the right environments where people can tell their stories and be their own advocates. While the circumstances that people face during war and disaster may seem extreme, we also know that the right intervention at the right time can make the difference for a vast majority of people. It can allow people's participation in social and community life, into employment, and a path to self-reliance. And it can prevent trauma from spreading across generations. Both in countries at war or at peace, mental health is a global issue and enormous efforts are being made by organizations around the globe. If we harness this vast collective experience, real change is possible for people around the world. The ICRC, with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, has a growing body of evidence and good practice built on our close proximity to people affected. We provide a broad response in crisis situations, from psychosocial support, psychological and specialized mental health support, and we rely on the local presence and the principled humanitarian action of the movement of the Red Cross and Red Crescent to reach those in need, including those particularly vulnerable in non-governmental areas in many of the conflicts in which we are exposed. We know there is no one-size answer for all. Responses must be specific to people's circumstances, strengths and abilities. For instance, children, the elderly, survivors of sexual violence or torture require specific responses. Long-term medical and health services are often required to ensure a continuum of care through cycles of conflict, instability, and more peaceful periods. We need the right workforce to support this approach. We are acutely aware of matching the appropriate professional to people's needs when it comes to physical health. You wouldn't send an eye specialist to provide physiotherapy, nor would you send a first aider to perform surgery. For mental health conditions too, the right workforce is critical. Quality mental health care requires specialized mental health professionals, as well as local health and community groups that provide frontline, community-based support. It is vital that we strengthen the local workforce. For example, the ICRC is contributing to a workforce pipeline by training local psychologists and other mental health professionals in Syria and Azerbaijan, just to mention two places. Collectively, though, there is more to be done. We need to scale up early action. We must address endemic stigma and discrimination. We need long-term investment, both funding and training, to support national health and emergency response systems. And we need to support for the mental health and psychological well-being of volunteers and staff who are responding to humanitarian needs at front lines. In December, at the International Red Cross Conference, Red Cross and Red Crescent Conference, we will table a resolution on mental health and psychosocial support to ensure this life-saving support is integrated into all humanitarian responses. We are calling for states to champion this resolution, and I ask you to join us by making your own commitments in line with these calls to action. This is a moment for urgent action, Sigrid has mentioned in her introduction. People in crisis can't wait any longer. I encourage you to build on the momentum, to make strong commitments, and to partner with others so that some of these efforts results in greater impact for people in need. I thank you.
وقتی که چوجن پیش چاده کی انسانی بریم وان کافر بابا اوش خبر هم تعذبون نقل النفس عم ببي
الدنيا خرابه والدنيا خوشه شن قال حكومتنا باري زاروي من نوير النبت حتى بس قلنا مش بروان شباب النوت هاتت طلق الباندرات سر شرعي من كشتي ده جم مقو خواسي مزارون بكو جنم طاعت المزارون بك بجم دي شاوة طاعت الخلق يتقدر
مش ما تقول ما دي سبريفا كذا يعني الويدري الروجا السيدة هذا الويدة يعني شيء السيدة كل ما دي سنة وعندك تعدل مكان كنت آخر رشاش الملا كنت آخر رشاش هتعنهم ملمني خرابه وبشتعمل سيفا قراجل مخرابنا
يا عربي وهانك وهاب شنغال كرين بي حتى دنيا كش مت شنغال وانا قرح نافي بهاد بانا شنغال هابچن هانك تشي افغوري يكون كوجي وان خدي زاني چند شنغال كان
انسجار depression is very common for everybody. Most of them are traumatized because of cases of rape. Some of them were kidnapped by ISIS and returned back. Some of them lost their members of their families. We call it cumulative trauma because the trauma happened during the ISIS invasion, also happened when they returned back, when they have no house anymore, they have no family, no job.
دي مال دما وسبرديجي برد مزدي مقيم برد متعريبه مقاولينا أصدر كذا دي أزار مال دما جانا زار من مواد جين هم باني تات كن سوتني مسناچم وزدري غرفة يدقرم وسبردي بردم وسقولوا باجي فن مرينم المتاريال بيجي الحمد لله على عجيتكم أصهروا إيه على عجيتكم المهروا إيه برنا خوات برنا هازدين بو.
That's why we decided to hire social workers from the community, train them well on how to talk to the people that need help. We don't want to give them medication and go, that's it. We want to really help them. The social worker collects the cases that needs the intervention of psychiatrists and she refers the cases to him. He supervises the whole process.
بيجنش مال در كابين بشرش خراب بهنين إيش خراب كنا قال تفكيرها بريه همو كي بعفيجا بجوي تفكيري استريخ وبعفيجا يكاد نوش خراب استريخ وبكا أسبي مرتاح دبم بهنام بي يعني وقت مخوار بهنام بي في الهدبي أسبي مرتاح دبم. يا خرابري بلا كتوشنا خلاص بكن ويا ددوي بلا شنقالك أمان شي بكن يا أمان يعني كأمان هبش خبر شنقال وشي.
When you see the number of beneficiaries is rising, that where more people would like to come and talk, to share their stories, we consider this as a good impact on the community. So we wish that we get more support, more funds, that we can provide more services and continue more with these kind of services.
Discussion underway. I'm delighted to introduce our panel, our first panel of these 2 days, Voices from the Field, we've called it, and I would like the participants to make their way to the stage now. They each have lived experience of being in war and conflict situations, and as a result of what has happened to them, have actually found the strength to take action to help others in their community. So if I could ask each of you to come up onto the stage now, and then we will begin our discussion. I will, of course, introduce you. So please make your way, and we'll make our way over here. It's important, we felt, to begin this particular forum, this conference, by talking to people with lived experience before we move on to, the practicalities and what can be done to improve and integrate psychosocial support. So let me ask you, first of all, if you can just sit here. Yep, that would be great. Deepa there, and Saki there. Great. So let me introduce you first of all one by one. So Saki Omar is from Afghanistan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Saki, in any of this, but we've met and we had a conversation over the last day about the work that he does, and he's involved in really negotiating for people who have been kidnapped so that they can get mental help and psychosocial support. He is the local person and the focal person within the Afghan Red Crescent Society, and it's really access that you're engaged in negotiating for the Red Crescent to get people out and to also help them cope with the situation that they found themselves in. Jayadeepa Punyamurthy is Commissioner on Office of Missing Persons in Sri Lanka, and she trained as a community-based psychosocial worker, and you've worked with survivors of gender-based violence and other violations in eastern Sri Lanka for many, many years now, more than 16 years?
16 years.
Yeah. And here we have from Uganda, Achan Sylvia, who is also working with gender-based violence very, very closely. Now, during the conflict in northern Uganda, her father was killed and her mother's whereabouts are unknown after being kidnapped by rebels. And you have a story to tell about your family. And so really, I hope everyone listens to this in the next half hour or so we have, with not only compassion, but also admiration for the resilience of these people, these individuals, and what they have managed to do in their own localities and the situations they have found themselves in. So, Achan, tell us a little bit about the situation in northern Uganda and what happened to your family and what it drove you to do.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. By the name Achan Sylvia, a war survivor. My father was killed during war. I suffered this trauma until now. When you ask me, I have a story that I can tell. I don't forget what happened in my life. I have my parents, whom I really feel you are all my people. I belong to you. And a human being who is out need to think about this. In my community, we train the women. We have the war survivors. I am a survivor. I feel the pain. We have the survivors. We have the children that is born out of rape, which it's becoming very difficult in my country to get their identities because they came back from the bush, from the captivity, as the war survivors as well came back from the captivity.
Are they still coming back?
They are not coming back at this time, but we're still having that trauma and the stigma which is remaining in them. They still call them names at this moment.
So these people who've come back from the bush, who've been raped, find themselves not wanting to discuss it because they attach a stigma to it, there's a shame attached to it.
And you know, with that rape-related sexual stigma and discrimination, survivors are being accused of causing this violence, which it brings negative effect to the survivors and their relatives.
So the survivors are being blamed for what's happened to them?
Yeah, the survivors are being blamed for what happened to them. And the other hand, when rape takes place, the perpetrators sometimes are often not arrested, or if they are arrested, they pay their way out. And these are the same people who goes back to the community and then face the same crime again, which brings negative effect.
So there's no accountability because those who perpetrate the crimes, even if they're caught, you're saying, basically can bribe their way out of prison or any kind of sentence, and they go back into the community and do the same again.
Yeah, it's true, which is causing a lot of fear and a threat to the survivors.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll delve a little deeper in a moment into what you've done about it and what the work you're doing there. But I'd like to turn now to Deepa, if I may call you, and tell us a little bit about your experience, because you too had a great personal trauma.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm humbled to be here at the presence and international community, focusing on mental health and psychosocial needs of victims of crisis. Yes, now my name is Jayadeepa, but now I'm called by my community as a victim. So already I'm lose my own identity because that incidents happened me.
So may I ask what happened?
Yeah, I'm come from a small village in my own city. It is East Province of Sri Lanka. It is far over from almost 400 kilometers from our Colombo city. So I am living with my husband in my own village. In 2009, he was abducted by unknown person. So till I'm searching him as a single woman, I have many challenges facing into my community from on my community and our state and other things also. As a wife of disappeared, I'm searching my husband for more than 200 places. It is in my own city and far away from my own city. Mm-hmm. My language is Tamil. I don't know other language, so I'm facing so many problems when I went to the detention camps, police station, other organization and state authorities also. They didn't ready to understand what I'm saying.
So they couldn't understand when you went to the authorities. How long has your husband been disappeared?
Now, 10 years. When he was missing, my child, I have a baby son, but now he is in 12 years. So till I'm searching my husband, but no any information about him.
And for a very, very long time, you made his dinner every evening, hoping he would come home.
Yeah, but still I feel I'm alone because nobody ready to help me to find about my husband. And also in Sri Lanka, they have any proper system to made a complaint about the disappearance, and they're not ready to recognize about our feelings and the needs.
So we'll again talk a little bit more about that in a moment. He disappeared when your child was a baby. He's now 12 years old. Zaki Omar, hello, welcome. You work in Afghanistan, of course, in very difficult situations. What brought you into this line of work?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers, colleagues from different organizations. So today I would like to share one of my experiences negotiating with the armed groups to have their permission and access for implementation of psychosocial support activities. So it was 2nd July, and me and my colleague, 2 colleagues, one from the HQ level and one from the provincial level, we went to one of the villages of Khost province controlled by the armed groups. So our main purpose of the mission was to sensitize 125 religious leaders and community elders on psychosocial support and the volunteers management and the female, and take their permission for the active participation of the female volunteers in the activities of the psychosocial support. So it was at 9 o'clock when I and 2 of my colleagues, we sat in the car and we wanted to go to the village. So when we sat in the car, I was very much stressed and worried about the result of the first sensitization workshop that we will have with the armed groups. So when we arrived, our colleague who was responsible for coordinating the activities in the area, so he coordinated with the home groups to come to the girls' schools, but when we arrived there, the armed group rejected to come to the girls' school. So they asked us to come to their place, and it's called madrasa. So me and my colleagues sat in the car and we went to the area and we went to the madrasa. So when we arrived, we greeted each other based on the local culture, and we sat on a carpet in a room, and we greeted each other, they welcomed us, and based on the Afghan culture, we started our session with recitation of Holy Quran. And after that, we asked for the permission to start the sensitization workshop. and provide them information mostly on the activities of Afghan Red Crescent Society, on the psychosocial part, volunteers management, and female active participation. So we took the permission, two of my colleagues, so they started talking on the fundamental principles of the movement and providing some other information about the volunteers management. And I was the person to provide information on the psychosocial support interventions. So they were talking, and my colleague finished his information on the volunteers management. Then I started talking on the psychosocial support. I was very much scared, and as well as I was very much stressed. And some parts of my clothes, they were all wet. And when I started talking, there were 25 young and old participants that they were living there. So I started providing them information on psychosocial support. So they were laughing, and there was a smile on their face, and they were interested in noting. When I was looking into their smile, I was feeling more scared, and I was thinking there's something fishy, because they were looking at me fishy, and okay. So this was also done, and these informations last for like 3 hours. And one of them from the group, he said that, okay, so you're here, we cannot negotiate with 3 people. So I'm the representative of these 25 people. So please select one of the representatives from your group, so I should negotiate with you. So one of my colleagues was 37 years old, and another was 42. And when I looked at them, they were scared, and the fear was completely shown and known from their face. And one was looking on the window, another was looking on the floor, because they were not interested to negotiate. Then I said, okay, I'm the person to negotiate with you. And I was really scared, because a single mistake could cause us a disaster there. And so we started negotiations, and the person, as a representative, took a piece of paper out of his pocket, and he said, we have some nice questions for you. You have to answer and convince us for this. Then when I saw...
Did you realize at this point that things were going seriously wrong?
Yeah, I was very much scared, and I said, okay. So he started asking some questions on the psychosocial support. The first question was that, why Afghan Red Crescent Society is working in the war-affected areas? And the questions were getting hard and hard, and I couldn't answer just immediately, so I was waiting for a minute to think and answer. The second question that they asked me was, do you implement psychosocial support activities in the affected or war-affected areas? Do you think that the people that they are fighting are having some psychological problems? And because everyone is fighting for his own goal and belief. And the next question was that, do you implement the psychosocial support activities to change the belief of the people? And I was just shocked and very much stressed, and I was just perspiring. And another question was that if there is war in an area and there are 2 injured soldiers, one from opposition group and one from foreign troops, which one do you provide help and psychosocial support first?
So you were going, if you answered the wrong question or gave the wrong answer, you were in a lot of trouble. Can I ask?
I was just killed there if I was answering a single question wrong.
And were they interested in psychosocial support, or was it just really to tease you and
No.
Is that of interest to them, the rebels?
They were very much, first they didn't have the information there. When I provided information for them, the only solution I could find was to link the psychosocial activities with their local culture and with the Islamic issues that we have. So when I provided information based on the Islamic links on the psychosocial support, so they were more interesting. They were more interesting on the psychosocial support, so I was feeling that I'm really, really scared and thirsty because I was just feeling the thirst in my throat. So it was more than 3 years that we were negotiating. I told them that, so let's have a break and take a coffee or tea. So they smiled and said that, okay. And I just asked for the permission that if they don't mind, I can smoke a cigarette out of the room. And they told me that it's okay, you can go. When I went out of the room, so the whole these parts of my clothes, they were wet. And I was very much stressed. I smoked 2 cigarettes there. Then when I came back, so again, we started the talkings. So overall, they were asking very difficult questions, and in some of the questions I was asking for the help of my 2 colleagues that please help me on that. So at the end, we had lunch, and I was trying to make the environment a little bit okay for myself, and I told them that don't you offer the guests food because we are feeling very hungry and it's lunchtime. One of the colleagues sitting there, the participant saying there, he said that, okay, eat lunch more. You have to answer more questions that we have.
How did you get released? How did you get released in the end?
So at the end, let me come to conclusion. So overall, I answered all the questions for them. But the questions I needed to wait, think, and get help of my friends and them. Then overall, the colleague, the representative noted all the points. And he said that, okay, you take some lunch, I will just come back. He made a call. So he made a call and he gave all the answers to the commanders of the armed groups. And the thing came to the female participation. And they had some of the conditions for implementing of psychosocial support for the females. And they said that we want a female trainer to come and train the females in this affected community. So we accepted this, and when they looked into all the answers that we had about the psychosocial support for them based on the local culture and the Islamic issues, so we overall convinced them, and they said that, okay, you can come and implement the psychosocial support activities in this community.
But this so demonstrates you're at the coalface of this. It could have gone either way for you, and I'd like to come back to that in a moment and talk about how you came through that, but also then the integration of those psychosocial supports in a community where the rebels clearly wanted help. But if I could turn to Achan and just talk about how you were able to come out of your experiences and what you have been able to do in your community in terms of integrating psychosocial supports. And then I'll talk to you about the same deep end and see where there are commonalities between each of your experiences.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Out of my experience, I am a member of SEMA. That made me strong. To come out of my experience, it was so painful because I thought I had no reason to live. But when I think and see the children suffering and the women coming out of captivity, I feel the pain as a survivor. The pain that I feel is what the other one is feeling. So I decided to come up in 2011 when I worked with the Norwegian Refugee Council and World Food Program to serve the people in the IDP camps. Since I myself also grew up in the IDP camp, life was very difficult.
Just explain a little about the camp.
Yes. It's the internal displaced person, camp. It was during the insurgency in northern Uganda where people were engaged and staying in the camp in small houses when I came back from captivity, I found my parents were not there, and my sister was shot dead during that time when we were going in a hide, and I had to lie in a pool of blood. There was no home for me. I had nowhere to stay. I could beg for food. But with the vision, seeing that really, how should I come up out of this situation? I need to go and beg people so that I study, to support and help my fellow women. When I see a woman, I see a mother in that person. Because when I came back from captivity, I never saw my mother again. I never saw my father. I lost my sister. She was 2 months pregnant at the age of 13 years old. It was difficult for me. When I engaged myself working with the Norwegian Refugee Council in 2011, I said this is too much because I was put in a situation where I was giving psychosocial support to the people after getting a bachelor degree in social work and social administration.
And were there many people like you in your locality, trained like you?
Come again?
Were there many people trained like you to give psychosocial support?
There were few people, and up to now, as I speak, there are few psychosocial support persons who are giving support to the people because the stigma and trauma is still there.
And that is something that's very common, I think, in each of your experiences. Can you tell me what kind of supports do you offer them? Do they come to you? Do you find them? Do people come to you willingly? How do you give your support?
Oh yeah, normally when we have, because they know that I was from captivity and I'm doing this work, supporting the women and the children born out of captivity, I go to radio stations and I talk about, so people get to know what I do. And they help the support, the psychosocial support that I give to the people, they go and tell other friends because they get relieved out of this. Okay. Normally we do mediation cases to settle up other sexual gender-based violence issues. What I do, I normally engage the men as well because this issue, it is the men and the women. I engage them in these small mediations, we settle it, and then we also create pathways during the mediation. Maybe a rape person could come with maybe we have different stories that we normally have. So we refer others maybe to legal action because of the assault and the rape, and also to the hospitals. But basically it is really very difficult for the survivors to get this treatment.
Because the doctors aren't trained either.
The doctors are not trained.
Specialized.
We don't have specialized social support persons to attend to this issue. The trauma is still there. We had a lot of suicidal cases whereby, like one of my neighbor, she had the man defiled the lady, the daughter, and the woman could not talk about this. The issue was reported to the police. Now, since as a survivor, she has nowhere to stay, what she did, she had to go and tell the police that, you know what, we need to go back and settle this issue. Look at all this. This is so embarrassing and so painful.
And keeps replicating the trauma as well, the experience.
Yeah, it's true.
Let me turn, if I may, just to Jaideepa right now. Stigma is a huge issue in your part of the world and in Sri Lanka as well. So we left off where you were going to the police and nobody understood you and the authorities weren't helping you. Where did you find the strength, with your husband still missing, to say that I know there are plenty of other people who need help too? And what did you do?
Sorry.
Where did you find the strength inside to decide, if I can't be helped, if the police won't help me, what can I do? What will I do to help others?
So, in the Sri Lankan history, this is the first time one of the victim become a commissioner or become a state functional in Sri Lanka.
You're the first time.
Yeah.
It's the first time you're a victim and you've become a commissioner.
Yeah, that's why I feel if I'm become a commissioner, I can help with the people. At least when they are speaking with us, can listening them first things, because when earlier when I went to the commissions, when I start to speaking about my needs and about my feelings, they didn't ready to listening that. Immediately they refer me to any other reparation things or any other money or housing or scheme, whatever. Immediately they referred. And when I went to the police station, they asking, you did made a complaint, no? If you lost your tractor, well, okay, it's no problem. We will try to find out your tractor. So they couldn't realize about the human value on that time. So when I went to the any other places also, I can't celebrate my life with my own choice or with my son, because all the time all the people are granted among ourselves as individual women. They can use for their sexual purposes or something. So immediately they have an idea about ourselves like this.
So you have no dignity. In some ways, they are taking away your dignity.
Yes, that's why I told earlier, because my name is Jaydiba, but always I'm called by my people and all state officers and community as a victims. Victims always have been victimized by our own community and on our state officers. As a woman, in my culture, we can't live alone without any men, because all the time men only have the main role of our family.
Sure.
So like me, there are so many women, they were living in my country, and even if my husband disappeared, I can't celebrate my own child issues and all child things also. I cannot go forward of the society or particular event, because they are neglected by us as a victim and as a without men. If we have like this incident, even last 4 days also, I went a school program with my son. So it is when I went the program, somebody asked me, how are you wear this like sticker, and how are you wear beautiful sari, and how are you wear like jewels, because you missed your husband since 10 years. He didn't come back to you and living with you. So you are living alone. So how can you wear like this dress and makeup? So since it's continue as in my area also very rural area, so we always have to depending on our culture, in our religious, in our culture structure. So
if I could just turn to Zaki now, because women also in Afghanistan have similar issues. But if I could ask you, it seems to me from what I've heard that there are more structures, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Afghanistan to cope with mental health and to give issues and to give psychosocial support. Am I correct?
Yes, there are different structures that they are providing the psychosocial support when the women are affected of violence.
There's gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence. So when they are a woman, there are a lot of cases in Afghanistan that women are affected, especially in the areas that they are controlled by the armed groups. So when something happens, they have to first follow a process. They have to open a case in the Human Rights Commission and as well as in the Ministry of Women Affairs. So these two organizations, they are responsible for processing their case. And for their mental health, the Ministry of Public Health, the Mental Health Department, they are supporting them, and they will provide them the specialized services and as well as the basic services that they have on psychosocial support.
So what do you need? You clearly still need resources.
Yes, of course, the needs are a lot, but with Afghan Red Crescent Society, we have a very small unit for this psychosocial support. And if we have more funds, so there will be more activities, and we only have 800 trained volunteers on psychosocial support, and it's for 36 or 30 million people. It's very difficult to cover them. And if there are more activities and international support on the psychosocial support for Afghan Red Crescent Society, it would be great. And many people that they are affected, they will receive the psychosocial support. And yeah.
And thank you. And Jaideepa, presumably you need more integrated psychosocial support from what it sounds like, from just how you're even living your daily life, never mind the people you're trying to help.
Yeah, I want there to be acknowledgement of the suffering of families of the missing. First, this has to start from our own community. Our neighbors must understand the pain that have. Others must support our struggle to find the truth. And also the risk that women especially face after lost their husbands like this. Office like OMP must be sensitive to the emotional and psychosocial problems of families of the disappeared and should help them to access services. They must also recognize that what is most important for our psychosocial well-being is not counseling when we cry during the hearings, but sensitive assistance in our search help with bringing up our children or making the society support is better. There is a world, there are many people, but where is human being and where is our loved ones? As a mother, I'm waiting for my son. As a wife, I'm waiting for my husband. As a single woman, I'm waiting for my life. As a victim, I'm waiting for justice. Here is a community with humanitarian. I hope here is community with psychological sensitiveness. If that, what can you do for our justice? If you can, definitely it's not only me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid I could listen to, I'm sure you could hear much more from everyone here. We have run out of time, I'm afraid, but I would like to hear from Achan, because your story is as compelling as everyone else's here, and I'd love to know what is it that you would like to say on behalf of your community and what you need.
Yeah, thank you so much. On behalf of my community, what I need is creation of more sexual gender-based violence shelters whereby the women could come and access informations, different informations, and referral pathway where they can be helped, especially during the gender-based violence issues and when the ladies are being raped, like normally at the police, the CPS, my number, if you go to the CPS in Gulu, you find my number is in each office. When an issue related to sexual gender-based violence, to rape, they call me. I had to go there and attend, even to an old mother. I do that because I know the pain and I know how much it can support the other out there.
What do you need?
And then also increase community awareness. We increase the community awareness. This includes the basic rights of survivors to decent care. This also includes mobile legal clinics that could support, and having regular community dialogues to sensitize about sexual gender-based violence and rape. The community must address serious gender inequality and the tradition that harm women, like early or forced marriages, which reinforce the idea of women being the property of men. 3, improve prompt community access to medical help. Totally the problem is delays the challenges, reporting to police and examination by the doctors who are not trained in rape trauma. there is need for better training. Better training is needed, and then also the psychosocial support persons is really needed to make this issue to an end.
Okay, all right. I hope that each of our panellists will be able to continue the discussions with those of you who are interested in speaking to them during the break. We are going to take a short break now, and before we come back, and before I say thank you to everybody, I just want to let you know that downstairs today and tomorrow, alongside everything that's happening here, humanitarian organisations are are showcasing their activities in the basement and in some of the bake-out rooms. And these are organisations that provide MHPSS. So please feel free to drop by and have a look at those at any time downstairs in the basement during a break. I would ask, please, that everybody enjoy their coffee and conversation. Be back here if you can in 20 minutes at 11:10. But I would like, please, first of all, to these very brave, strong people. Thank you. Thank you. Well done. Well done. Thank you. So it's okay?
Okay, we are underway.
everything under control, taking pictures.
It might be, we could set something up in the margins while you're eating, or it might be better to
Hoppas det går väl ja. Thank you.
L'information était connue depuis l'hiver, on n'avait pas la date et on a eu sur le thème. Vous avez une carte parce que nous on va essayer, on va voir comment s'intitule le comité d'organisation. Et les politiques, c'est un peu dépendre du thème. Si on est sur un thème humanitaire comme ici, ou si on est sur un thème comme ça.
I'll just sit and look at my remarks. But that was just in front of a camera. It was less nerve-wracking than a big audience.
I know. The others did it already.
Yeah.
I used to speak very French, but it's really actually, I would like to
Oh, right.
I'm very, very pleasant that she would be very helpful and she would like to stay in touch with me. She is coming here for lunch because I'm going to prepare her. She's a speech, but then at 2 o'clock or something she will be here. Then I can write for you and you put. She looks like an angel. She has very long blonde hair.
Even more than happy. I have to take my luggage also. I hope for my luggage. I hope I will have to
But then you're not surprised when I'm not happy.
No, of course not.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Very happy to be here as well. I'm here to
so much.
But you can also leave it there if you want to.
Yeah, my bag is there.
Your bag, do you want to leave it there?
No, it's okay. I can leave this one as well.
Yeah. Where? Yeah. There are too many. There. I didn't know that.
So, hello, sir. Hello. Yeah, welcome. Nice to meet you, Per. This is so yeah, true, that's true. This is a different. Perfect. Please, gewoon volgende alsjeblieft. En even vragen wat zijn naam is en even opschrijven. Op de telefoon, maar zo bij je.
No, that's right. You have to be mindful of that.
Ja, leuk. Dat is ook wel leuk. Heel leuk. Would you rather have it clipped on your belt or inside your jacket? Sir? Hello. I'm Kareem.
Nice to meet you. Hello. Hi.
Get fired.
Yes, I am.
How are you? Same here. Thank you. That's normal. That's good.
I'm with the scarf. Okay.
But there's some here.
Very quiet speaker. There will be new.
We just met. Fabrice. Hello, how do you do?
Nice to meet you. I'll let you review your notes.
Well, yeah, we'd love to be
And you know that this is stranger.
Of things that are happening. And he will also make a painting of the next session. Maybe it's nice if you go up to him and have a chat, about, well, not now, because I want to speak to you about the painting he will make the next session. Because that's a funny bit as well. Now, of course, I will make sure that he draws the most interesting way. Otherwise we'll burn it.
No. Do it together. Soll ich mitnehmen? Ja, bitte.
That's right.
Ja.
Speaking German. That's the main word.
Well, yeah, I remember that.
We are behind schedule. We're supposed to start now, but the version started about
Nou, weet je, Harmen, misschien is het wel leuk om even nadenken of je dat perspectief wil of dat je hier gaat staan als hij het toneel op gaat. Ja. Kom even kijken. Geen idee. Weet je wat we doen is, kijk, hij komt waarschijnlijk een keer of 4, 5, 6, 7 aan het woord. Zodra we, en dan zijn we iedere keer draaien, en zodra we zeg maar 2 leuke quotejes hebben, dan laten we de rest lopen natuurlijk.
Dit is juist
precies, absoluut. Als je net niet zijn papier vast, een beetje shake. Dus dat is alleen maar een beetje en dan hebben we.
Blijf ik even hier.
Ja, maar ik ga even die tekenaar checken.
Thank you. We need them. Yes. Yeah, you too.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So I have then that even Stevie just to get some recommendations like training young people. Yeah, for example,
lost my cap.
Oh, I'm so sorry for you. I didn't bring mine, so that's fine.
Okay.
You're not gonna be listening.
Well, I think today you will try the time just to try.
Very good. Good luck. I know that. All the best. I'll talk to you later. Yes. Yeah.
gewoon hier zitten dan.
Good morning. Good morning. A very good morning to you. My name's Fabrizio. On the program it says TED-like talk, and of course in TED-like talks I'm glad for the like, because the like allows me to use notes, which of course in real TED talks they don't have it. But I'll tell you a secret. I mean, I work for the UN, that's not a secret. But UN bureaucrats always use notes because they're always afraid of upsetting governments, and that's the cardinal sin of a UN bureaucrat. So we need notes to make sure that we don't inadvertently, through a bad comma or a bad adjective or the wrong use of a certain noun, upset anybody in the room. So it's a safety precaution. But of course I just made that up. The real reason I'm using notes is I'm nervous, and this helps. So I want to tell you 2.5 stories, and I've never done this talk before, so I beg the time givers to forgive me if I go on for too long. I want to tell you 2.5 stories friends who were humanitarians and peacekeepers and who went through difficult situations. The first dates to August 19, 2003, and the next dates to April the 1st, 2011. And the half one at the end dates to today, this moment. So in August 19, 2003, the UN suffered what was to that date the worst attack ever, what many called its loss of innocence, the attack on the Canal Hotel site in Baghdad. 22 colleagues were killed. Among those colleagues killed was an extraordinary American Arabist, a political officer called Rick Hooper, 40 years old. Rick should not have died. Of course, nobody should have died, but Rick in particular. Rick should not have died because he was a political officer and his seat of work was in the political office, which was actually not affected by the bombing. It was in part of the building that was not hurt at all. Rick died because somebody that weekend went on leave because it was their wedding anniversary. And they just left to celebrate with their wife who was outside the country. Let's call that person John. So John needed to be replaced by somebody. And John insisted that Rick come and sit at his desk. But Rick didn't want to sit at his desk. And John said, no, you really have to be at my desk. The boss will want you right here, right on call. You have to be at my desk. So reluctantly, for those days, Rick left the political office and sat at John's desk. And the desk where John had left was hit by the bomb, and Rick died. Now, John was away. He was out of Baghdad. But he lost his boss, he lost 20 friends, and on top of that, he was saddled with the burden of guilt for Rick's death. So he suffered extreme trauma. And he went to the UN Compensation Service and asked if they would pay for his treatment. And he was told, this was 2003, that since he had not been in Baghdad, his trauma was not duty incurred, and the UN would not look after him. Fast forward 8 years. March 2011, an evangelical preacher in Florida burnt a Quran. The burning of this Quran in Florida in March was broadcast all over the world by the media. In Afghanistan, it was condemned by President Karzai, and demonstrations erupted throughout the country. On April the 1st, a mob of thousands of people tried to overrun the UN compound and succeeded. 4 Nepalese guards employed by the United Nations wearing blue berets were killed, as were 3 staff. The 3 staff were Joachim, a Swedish human rights officer, Filaret, a Romanian political officer, and Siri, a Norwegian military observer, and incidentally, the first ever Norwegian female fighter pilot. 2 of those 3 were beheaded. Those 3 had not made it into the shelters. Among those who had made it into the shelter was a friend of mine, let's call her Fatima, not her real name. She thought too she would die. She was trapped, packed like a sardine among the many staff in the shelter, while bullets were impacting on the sandbags that surrounded the shelter, hearing the explosions of grenades and mortar fire that was coming in. She was convinced she would die. And it was a long wait, a long, painful wait, before they were given the all clear to come out. As she came out, she saw stunned the burnt compound, and then she tripped, and she looked down to see what she tripped on. And she tripped on the head of one of her beheaded colleagues, who was also a close friend of hers. By then, 8 years later, the UN was better, and all the staff in MinBuZa were given 2 weeks off. And they were told counseling was available. She came to see me at the time I was working in personnel, and she asked what she should do. I asked, had she told her supervisor, had she sought counseling? She told me she hadn't, because she was worried about what it would do to her contract. She only had a 1-year contract, and she was worried that if she said something, it would affect her contract renewal. I said, but all medical things are strictly confidential, which of course they are, but of course they're not. Because if somebody is absent from work for 2 or 3 months, and it's because they needed a back operation or a hip operation or had a heart condition or pneumonia, everybody knows they're out for 2 or 3 months because they had a hip operation or a back condition or had pneumonia. But when it's none of those, there's silence. And everybody knows what silence means. Everybody knows what it is when you can't speak about it or you don't know the reason. And I found, when I tried to find place for her, because she could not go back to Afghanistan, I found that there was a mixture of sympathy, there was a lot of sympathy, but also of stigma. And there was stigma, and it's a special type of stigma. It's not a generalized, at least by 2011, it wasn't a generalized stigma towards mental health. It was a sense that we, humanitarians, peacekeepers, we have to be tough. And that sense of us having to be tough is woven into the self-image and the mindset of humanitarians and peacekeepers. It's not saying mental health is something bad. It's saying, as a doctor, you can't be afraid of blood. It's not that it's bad to be afraid of blood, but if you're a medical professional performing operations, you can't be afraid of blood. And that's the sort of self-stigma that exists, or at least existed, in the humanitarian and peacekeeping profession. Because the sense is you're always going to be exposed to those instances, and you have to be able to grit your teeth and get through them. Nobody can hear me? So I've been speaking to myself all this time. Sorry. I started as a humanitarian worker in the late 80s. And I remember being very struck how much time was spent at the end of very long, intense days among humanitarian workers in Sudan, South Sudan, in the occupied territories, Palestine, in Bosnia, where I served later. How much time was dedicated to telling war stories, sitting around and reminiscing about the near misses, sitting around and reminiscing about heroic acts. And it was almost like a ritual. But those stories were always had an element of self-glorification. And I think it was a form of critical stress debriefing, except for those stories never had any emotional content. Nobody ever said how they really felt. And I think the muted emotional part, the muted real stories of what was happening in their souls, was muted often with a lot of alcohol and sometimes drugs. And I'm sure surveys would show, certainly at that time, that the consumption of alcohol and of drugs among peacekeepers and humanitarian workers was disproportionately high. But this leads me to another point. When one came home as a humanitarian worker, people would often say, but how can you bear it? How can you put up with that? And it was always difficult to explain that, in fact, many of us felt very privileged. Many of us felt we had the best jobs in the world. And this is something I've thought about so very much. I've wondered, is it a form of sort of being thick-skinned, that you don't see the suffering of others? But I've come now to the realization that the issue is that you're never an onlooker. As a humanitarian worker or as a peacekeeper, you're never just looking. You're actually doing something about it. And I think critical to the health of humanitarian workers and peacekeepers is that sense of agency, is that sense that you're actually making a difference. And that's very addictive. That's what provides tremendous motivation to those in the profession. But more than motivation, it also provides a degree of mental protection. Because as long as you're acting, as long as you're doing something, you somehow are asserting your own power. And it's where you feel trapped and where you lose that autonomy of action and where you feel helpless. That's where the mental, your protection mechanisms start to break down. The shields start to disintegrate. And I think if you look to the stories of humanitarian workers who have broken down, there's always an element of losing that sense of autonomy and becoming, in some sense, helpless. And that is, of course, what distinguishes humanitarians and peacekeepers from victims of conflict. Humanitarian workers and peacekeepers are empowered to act. They are given the means to act, whereas victims are, by definition, largely helpless. And that puts them in a much more vulnerable situation. And of course, what also distinguishes them is that every humanitarian worker and every peacekeeper always knows that they can leave at any moment. And of course, though the nationals in any situation, cannot leave at any moment. The UN has moved a lot since those days, and they're really now trying to change. And the first thing they're trying to do is to get rid of the stigma. And I think the Secretary General, who has a very strong interest for mental health and who started the first of these events in London, or was there at the outset, has launched a major campaign against the stigma. And there are many other initiatives like telecounseling. But I think the point about mental health is that unlike other illnesses, people rarely reach out for help. It takes a certain level of well-being to acknowledge that one needs help and to have the courage to step forward and get help. Most people with mental health difficulties just want to crawl in a corner and disappear, or they want to just numb the pain through self-medication. So people have to look out for them, and colleagues in the humanitarian environment have to look out for one another, and bosses have to look out for those they are supervising. But to do that, you have to foster an atmosphere from the beginning where people feel it's safe to tell their stories. You can't wait for the crisis to strike before you ask people if they're okay. You have to create an atmosphere in the office where people feel it's okay to admit weakness, where it's okay to come forward with vulnerabilities. And I think that's a very big challenge in what is still a very macho environment. So to conclude, I've told two stories, and I still owe you half one more. And the half will be very brief because it's about me. And it's the only one with a real name attached, mine. To be honest, it's a small miracle that I'm standing here before you today, that I'm still alive, that I am not an alcoholic, because I, too, experienced a traumatic incident. In this case, it was 1992 in Bosnia, and I was in a convoy, the first convoy that tried to reach the eastern Bosnian city of Gorazde that had been under siege. And on a mountain track, the convoy ran into a minefield. People were killed. The convoy was ambushed, and we spent the night trapped in an ambush spot, convinced we were all going to die. Obviously, we didn't die. But I was left with a great sense of trauma. It was also cumulative. I'd lived through many very, very difficult situations. And it took years to recover. And one of the symptoms, the most persistent symptom, was that I couldn't talk. And I mean that quite literally. When I came out of Bosnia, without the help of alcohol or a heavy dose of tranquilizers, I literally could not say good morning to somebody at the office without wanting to burst into tears. And the thought of speaking in public, the thought of standing before an audience like this, even with all these notes to help me as a prop, was just totally unthinkable. And yet here I am. And I'd like to conclude my remarks by thanking those who made it possible. And I, like the minister, agree with the existence of souls. So I'd like to thank whoever creates souls, because I think they contributed. But I'd also like to thank all the mental health professionals here today. Because it was many years of treatment by different mental health professionals that made it possible for me to have a career, to be here, to overcome my symptoms. And of course, many don't have access to that treatment. I was one of the lucky ones. But I'd like to thank you all. Please keep up and continue your great work. Thank you.
My first 6-7 years were filled with movement and anxiety and just a lot of like death and the smell of death. So when I became an adult until now, I'm just still trying to register these memories that I have and these, you know, like just things that I think about or that a child should never think about. There were times where you had to leave your camp because like an attack would come, and then the panic of where you go next, where you go next started happening. My grandparents like, where you going next, what are we doing next? Like it was just like everyone was trying to leave, but they don't know where they were going. And I just felt like that whole refugee, that's when I realized that we don't have a home. My father, he was a child soldier. He died because of a infection from a gun. Back in the days, he got shot, and the bullet was left in there because if they took it out, he would die instantly. Before he died, he actually sat me down over the phone, and he was telling me all his wishes for me and how I should just continue doing what I want to do, and that's just it. As soon as we left, I still had a fear of, okay, where we'll go next, we're probably not going to be there forever, and that's just that. Like, we went astray, we were safe, we had a house, we had everything, but I still felt as if, like, there was something still coming. Thank you. I was working in McDonald's, and, yeah, I was about to leave my shift, and this lady stopped me and said, I love your face, I love your scars, here's a card. And then eventually word got back to me and said, you want to go to Paris, you want to sign a contract. I'm like, Paris? Where's Paris? That's so far away, where's that? And I did one of the biggest shows in the world in Paris. Sometimes I have to pinch myself, like I'm here, like I'm really here. I get to wake up, I have safe homes, I have flights on flights on flights, and I have a team that really believe in me, and I couldn't fathom this like 4 years ago. That's probably like the common ground. I think that's probably like the subconscious thought that pushed me to go to psychology, is the fact that I've experienced it, I've seen it, I've watched it, I will constantly watch it because it's something that happened or is happening around me. So I feel like being a refugee, your psychological state is always a matter. A war child and children in conflict. It was an ode to the man I never knew, my father. And I feel like working with them is like almost working alongside people that would have helped my father if he was here. And I'm just like, yeah, I will help these kids. I'll be one day be someone's father, mother, or someone's sister, brother. You know, I will be alongside you guys in everything you do.
So it is now time for our next panel discussion, and this time we're going to be talking to people who are scaling up mental health and psychosocial supports in their various regions. We'll hear from them about the work that they do, but also try and learn from them what they think should be the way forward in terms of scaling deep as well, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I'm going to ask our panelists now to come up and join us here on the stage, and I will introduce them as they arrive up on the stage and join me. We would like to have time for Q&A towards the end, so maybe about 10 minutes before the end, I'll throw the panel... I was about to say throw the panel to the floor. I don't mean that literally. Please take a seat. There are people with microphones. There'll be 2 microphones. So if you would like to ask a question towards the end, I'll signal that we can widen the conversation and put your hand up, and we'll take it from there. So I'm looking forward to a very invigorating discussion. Thank you, everybody. Why don't we just briefly start with your name and where you're from and what you do?
My name is Rabia Shammai. I'm a psychiatrist and the head of the National Mental Health Program at the Ministry of Public Health.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marit Sibrandi and I'm an associate professor at the VU University Amsterdam.
You're a researcher?
I'm a researcher, yes.
I'm Bilgis Jubari. Is it working? I'm Bilgis Jubari. I am a therapist and the founder of Family Counseling and Development Foundation. And also I am a professor at Sana'a University. I'm from Yemen, which is the most important thing.
The most important thing from Yemen.
Do you know Yemen? Raise your hand.
You will after this.
My name is Anand Galapati. I'm a medical anthropologist. I'm the co-director of an online platform called mhpss.net, but I'm also a practitioner working in Sri Lanka.
My name is Karim Albrim. I'm originally from Aleppo, Syria. Currently, I live in Hamburg, Germany. I'm the chair of the National Refugee Advisory Board for Addiction and Trauma Issues in Germany.
So let's start with you, because you're a person with lived experience in the sense that you left Syria, you got to Greece by boat, and then you walked across Europe to get to Germany, deeply traumatized, and also looking after 3 young children who you didn't know, who were also traumatized, that you really thought hard about whether you could take them along with you. But you got them to Germany. One's now in Sweden. You yourself got to a camp in Germany. You knew you needed help. You knew you were having mental health issues, but no one could help you for a year or so. And then what happened?
Exactly. So as you all know, during 2015, the situation in my city, Aleppo, was very bad. The bombs were raining down. My neighbors were buried in the rubble, and my younger brother and I were injured. So anyone can be traumatized by an unpleasant event. But imagine the situation of people in conflict areas, whether they are a child, a girl, a man, or a woman, old or young. They experience many unpleasant events in one day. But it is not only for one day. It's actually almost daily for several years. So in my country, there are negative perceptions about any kind of mental health problems. So they think psychosocial support is a shameful thing or for crazy people.
So even when you were in Germany in the camp, you were surrounded by your countrymen and women, and people didn't want to talk about their mental health issues.
Exactly. And that was really difficult for me, and we never talk about it like openly. This is unfortunately part of the culture. And if I would be now in Syria and say, like, I need psychosocial support, the people gonna look at me really weird way and ask me a question this way: are you crazy? So
how did you get help in the end?
At the end, when I was as I said, in a refugee camp in Germany, as you said, I knew that I needed help. I had no knowledge about mental health or psychosocial support, but I was suffering. I had tension in my body. I was suffering from terrible nightmares. And I remember when I had a session with a psychotherapist, a German psychotherapist, and an interpreter was supporting me because I had not learned German yet at that time. So if I would talk, he would summarize what I'm saying in 2-3 words.
That's what
and
they do.
And he would like talk about symptoms that I don't have even. So that's why after that I really refused 3 times to have like a session with the psychotherapist. But what was good that I got support from a German lady who was like in general supporting people in the camp. She told me there is a training, psychosocial training you can do. And at the beginning I was very hesitant, but I said, okay, I'm now in Germany. No one knows me here. No one gonna talk about me badly or because they think that I'm gonna damage my reputation if I will ask for this support. So I was lucky to get this training. I had 3 months like self-experience. They started like with me, with offering me like a trainings, physical trainings based on biology because this is what I already know. And in our community, we don't have any negative perceptions about biology. So that was really good for me. And after that time, I noticed that I felt the change. I felt the benefit of this training.
Physical change.
Physical change. And I think that was, that changed my I can say, the negative perceptions that I had from my culture, my society. That was even the turning point that helped me to succeed and be where I am today. So after 3 months, so I started doing the training. I'm now a trainer. And I'm now supporting my community in their mother tongue. So.
And that is a wonderful story. If we could just take a step back, when you first started seeing the psychiatrist, it was through an interpreter. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that you realized after a while the interpreter wasn't conveying what you were saying accurately, and this was really making you even more ill.
Exactly. And he wouldn't like translate it correctly. And even the psychotherapist, he asked me like unpleasant questions. We had like different mentality, I come from different culture, and he asked me like inappropriate, I can say, questions. So I don't know if it's his mistake or it's the mistake of the interpreter, but I don't recommend that this to have interpreted like in a session with the psychotherapist. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, and we'll come back to you a little later. Dr. Bilkis Jawari from Yemen, you are obviously from a country that is experiencing a lot of violence, a lot of mental health issues as a result, and you did something which is quite unique in that part of the world. You set up a helpline that anybody could call, and you got the agreement of all the telecoms companies, the mobile phone companies, to do that. So how did that come about, and what did people to dial those 3 numbers, 136, hear when the phone was answered?
Okay. Let me tell you a brief things about my society. What's motivate me to establish the helpline is that I grew up in a society that female are exposure to lots of violence, GBV violence. And from that time, I tell myself, when I grow up, I will specialize and be a therapist. Maybe you know, Yemen is one of the more conservative societies that in the Middle East. It's a tribal culture in which the male dominate the female decision from birth to death. They apply lots of violence on them. Examples are plenty for this kind of behavior. It's like early marriage, forced marriage, polygamy, deprive from education, from work, from inheritance, forced her to obey even her younger brother, who is just 13 years old, just because he's a male.
Is her master.
Yes, and the helpline was very important in a society like this, because a woman can reach the helpline. It's just a 3-digit number that they call for free. It's all over. They can call from all over the country for no charge. And the most important thing is with no male involvement. So she can just call and seek for psychological counseling.
And what kind of counseling might she get? You have trained psychotherapists?
Okay. Yeah, our helpline is different than that any helpline that you might have known before. because in USA or Europe, it's a 5 minutes call that you will give advice or you will give information to go to the nearest clinic or mental health clinic, or it's also connected with the police department for critical cases that they can interfere, they can help the victims. In Yemen, it's completely different. Our single call lasts for 20 to 40 minutes because we are doing counseling psychology through the phone, which is more difficult.
So you're delivering a lot of services on that helpline.
Yes, and because we are the only help for those people, we have to do that. Sometimes, for example, if let's say it's a suicide case, we have to talk to her for a long time, to make her release a little bit, to encourage her to call back every day, to be connected with one of her relatives, to alert them to watching her at day and night and not to let her alone. And can you imagine the pressure that our helpline staff are exposing, because when the caller hang up, they don't know after that whether this case is alive for tomorrow or not.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll come back to it in just a moment. Ananda Galapati, in Sri Lanka, of course, there were many, relatively speaking, psychosocial supports because of Sri Lanka's experience with war. But this tapered off over recent years, but then came back under full spotlight again earlier this year with the tragic Easter bombings.
Yes. Well, so in many ways, sometimes I say that I've sort of grown up in the field as it grew up in Sri Lanka. So over the last 20 years, I've been involved with the development of psychosocial services in Sri Lanka, because we had a 30-year war, and sort of in the late 1980s we started with sort of work with victims of bombings and conflict violence. And one of the things that I was reflecting on recently was the fact that, a lot of the things that we've done to build services, to consolidate them, to set up courses, to train people to respond to emergencies, to develop protocols, to sensitize policymakers and so on about the importance of this, needs to be really sustained beyond crises. Because at the end of our war in 2009, and we also had the tsunami disaster of 2004, we actually had a great deal of understanding of the need and importance of MHPSS services. And we had quite a number of service providers. But in the decades since then, we've actually seen a deprioritization. Policymakers change, governments change, policies don't get renewed. The people we've trained, the programs shut down. I've seen, very committed community workers have to stop doing their work and sell insurance instead. So
it's impossible to scale up.
Well, it's challenging. We've done quite a lot of the hard work, but actually what we weren't able to do is sustain it. A decade after the crises, there wasn't quite that sense that this was a priority, that this was something that needed to be championed until earlier this year, tragically, with the Easter Sunday bombings. We suddenly found ourselves in a situation where we needed to respond to a crisis that actually, though it affected particular communities quite deeply, actually affected the entire nation and caused great distress and uncertainty. We hadn't had that kind of violence. And suddenly, unfortunately, we were not in the place to respond that we might have been a decade before.
So institutionally or at a societal level, has that been revisited now, that's scaling down?
Well, one of the challenges and one of the opportunities, it's horrible to say this, is that suddenly there is an awareness that we all need to be better able to respond, that the systems need to be put back in place, that every potential frontline responder ought to have psychological first aid training. And to be honest, before April this year, it was a hard sell. But, I would say that with these tragedies, we also have to see the potential for, using them to consolidate and to reinvigorate the work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Rabia El-Chami. Lebanon, of course, always under the spectre of potential conflict and living in a turbulent region. How has that informed your experiences, or how have your experiences been informed by that in terms of psychosocial supports that are continued to be needed today?
Well, let me start by saying I didn't expect to be that emotional today. So I'm very emotional and I'm very hopeful at the same time, because I truly believe that today is going to be a turning point for MHPSS. So thank you, simply. Thank you, Minister Kak. And the reason I say this is because in the 80s it wasn't the case. In the 80s in Lebanon, when bombs were falling on our house, when my parents needed to take decisions so quickly and take action to take us to safety, when in the first few years they needed to work relentlessly to ensure that we ate, that we went to school. All this energy, if they were severely distressed or if they had depression or anxiety, I'm not sure they would have been able to provide for us, and I'm not sure I would be sitting here today talking about MHPSS and emergencies. So, with that in mind, in humanitarian crisis, I do believe that MHPSS is a matter of life or death. It's not a luxury. It is as vital as food and water, as you always repeat. Now, putting back my professional hat as a psychiatrist, so if we take that into account and we know that 1 in 5 persons will suffer from mental disorder. So 1 in 5 will be affected in their capacity to care for themselves and for loved ones, and accessing other services that we want to provide them. So just imagine the scale of not really investing in MHPSS. Luckily, in the last decade or so, just because of the efforts of a handful of people and a few institutions, I'm not going to name all of them, not to forget anyone, but I don't know if it is a chance, but most of them are Dutch, by the way, and are here, so thank you to all of you. But I would like to thank one person in particular. He's going to hate me for it, Mark van Omren, who's been doing this for more than 15 years, trying to push mental health in the humanitarian sector. Thank you, Mark. Because now we know what needs to be done. We know. What do we need to be feeling good? We need a safe place. We need our loved ones to be safe. We need to ensure that we eat, our children go to schools, that if we need health services, we can access them, and that when you're giving us services, you respect us, and if I need a mental health service, I receive it. And the mental health service, and I can say that because I'm a psychiatrist, is not necessarily a psychiatrist. And right now, actually, as we speak, WHO is developing a minimum package for services. So we have a very clear idea about what needs to be done. It's not, just a representation. So we know what needs to be done. We have political support. So what we need to do is just get to action, I hope.
Just get it done. Thank you. Mary, you're a researcher in this area, of course. Tell us about the research that you have been doing, particularly the MP Plus programme, and the idea that as much as skilled medical professionals are needed in this area, the community can play a part too with proper training.
Right. So the Strengths Project, which I'm currently coordinating from the VU University, is a project with 15 partners from academic institutions all over Europe, but also even Australia, international institutions such as UNHCR, International Medical Corps, but also NGOs. And we're collaborating to get one important thing done, and it is to integrate mental health psychosocial support interventions, most notably the Problem Management Plus intervention developed by WHO into the healthcare systems of countries in Europe and in the Middle East. And we have 4 countries in Europe where we will do this, within the Netherlands, Switzerland, Egypt, Sweden, and in Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, and Egypt.
And what does it entail?
So Problem Management Plus is an intervention. It's developed by the WHO as part of their larger MHGAP program, and it's a 5-session low-intensity psychological treatment, and that's meant to reduce anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress symptoms in people who have been exposed to adversities, such as in crisis situations. And we have done 3 studies already on the effects of PM+, very large clinical trials in Pakistan, in Peshawar region, in Swat region, and also in Kenya, in females exposed to gender-based violence. And these studies, fortunately, all showed that PM+ is effective in reducing depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and improving daily functioning. And what's the most important part of PM+ is that it is delivered in the community by lay people, non-professional health workers who are trained to deliver this psychological intervention.
I'm going to put a question to you and Dr. Bulkers. How effective can this be, this kind of training or the counselling, for example, that you offer, against a backdrop of ongoing violence?
Well, there are studies showing that even in very unstable situations, interventions can be offered effectively. For instance, I was involved in a study done by a Turkish colleague at the border of Syria and Turkey, where males were in a refugee camp, the Kilis refugee camp, and in the night they actually went out of the camp to fight in Syria. And during the day they came back and they followed the treatment sessions. And even then she found a very positive effect. So I think it's mainly an empirical question. I think it is possible to offer interventions to people who are in very challenging, unstable situations.
And the challenges of doing your work against a backdrop of ongoing violence, talk a little about that, and in terms of scalable interventions, where would you like to see this helpline develop? How would it evolve? How would you like it to evolve?
Of course, now our helpline is working like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Maybe if we have more fund, we will make it 24 hours. This is one of the things. But the most important thing is that we are not able to raise awareness of people enough, because we have lots of illiterate people in Yemen. 40% of the people are illiterate. Illiteracy among the female is 77%. So we are posting, hanging posters, giving flyers, social medias, and we rarely can do advertisement through TV or radio, or because it's costly. So we noticed that just 10% of the calls come from illiterate people, and 59 something it's from more educated. They have secondary and university, and so this is one of the things. But do you ask before about the impact also of the work, or just what we want
against
to do?
ongoing violence? If you're trying to treat somebody over a phone line, but they put down the phone and then there's more violence, another attack, that must presumably be a challenge to try and have an impact on a person who's experiencing difficulties.
We don't have other institutions, like government institutions, that are helping. For example, helpline in your countries, they have connected to police. We don't have connection to police. They don't play active role. There is no even active legal protection for those people. So we are just helping her to be more strong, to stand for herself against the violence that
is ongoing.
So we work with the case.
I mean, just to jump in, I think one of the questions, I don't think it's an either-or question. Certainly, I think the things that we do in the more mental health space and psychosocial work, as people popularly understand it through interpersonal supports and therapies, is crucial. But I think that one of the things that we have recognized in the field of MHPSS, at least for a decade, is that other determinants are also really important, that some of the things around ensuring people's safety, ensuring that they can access basic services, protecting children's parents from death and injury is a key thing to ensuring children's well-being. So we can't divorce the interventions to protect well-being and psychosocial health from some of the other humanitarian actions that we need to take. And I think that often comes up in situations of protracted and kind of chronic violence, that people want those issues addressed. In terms of disappearances, they want justice. People want schools to be safe. And if we can offer that, that goes a long way and reduces the burden on some of the more explicit therapeutic work.
I wonder, do some of you feel you're just putting, what we call a Band-Aid on a situation?
Can I take that
Yes.
one? So I think the question is revolving towards the determinants of health, so social determinants of health, political determinants of health, and is this, maybe one also can ask, is it ethical to treat people who are depressed because of a political situation? Well, there are different lenses to this, but what we could know for sure is, the best preventive political solution would have been for the conflict not to happen, but politics these days are not very easy, and there's a lot of conflicts happening. What we can do is, and this debate, you could address some of the political determinants if you can, but most of us here are not actually politicians, so we don't have access to this level of decision. And we know that if communities and individuals are empowered, are in a good mental and physical health, they could also provide better for themselves and maybe themselves change some of these political or social determinants. So it's really double-tracked.
So how easy or difficult is it to train lay people in communities in Lebanon to offer the kind of support you're talking about?
So in Lebanon, actually, we took a different lens to it. We didn't choose one intervention and work on it.
Say that again?
So we didn't choose one intervention, like, for example, just PM Plus or just the MH Gap. What happened in Lebanon is that with the momentum of the humanitarian crisis, with all the humanitarian funds coming, the Ministry of Public Health, with the full support of the Director General, came up with WHO, UNICEF, and the International Medical Corps and created a mental health program. And this program actually, after a while, developed a strategy, so a full strategy to reform all the system for host communities and refugees. And with that in mind, the strategy allowed for all actors, including other ministries, and in Lebanon we work very closely with two strategic ministries, the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Education, because mental health is not only about services, it's a lot about other things. So we have a network of about 50 partners from UN agencies, ministries, NGOs working together to implement the strategy that aims at reforming the laws, but also including preventions in schools, scaling up services in line with WHO model of the pyramid, doing relevant research such as PM Plus to scale up specific interventions. So we used this momentum to build back better. We're not the first country. Sri Lanka did it before. I hope we will be able to sustain more and not fall back towards that.
And for someone who's not living in his own country, but living with many of his countrymen and countrywomen in another country, how would you assess the integration of psychosocial supports? How does it compare in terms of momentum that it might be building or working with partners to improve psychosocial supports?
Maybe I can share one good example of like an NGO called IPSO. It's an international psychosocial organization which got the permission from several states to train refugees or migrants and to be even certified. Like each person who would do that training would get like recognized certificate. And so they trained us in our mother tongue, as I said, in order that we can support our communities.
And sorry to interrupt, but do they start with the biological aspect of this? In some...
This is what I was doing for another project called Corizon. It's a psychosocial, like educational research project based at the University Clinic of Hamburg. So our mission was to learn, develop, and share information about resilience. So we help people build skills to strengthen their resilience. I think here is the important thing, that you need to focus on what makes us resilient, both as refugees and host community. So it's not only for refugees, and it's also for migrants and even for host community. And we build like mental health capacity by giving refugees insight to key concepts of psychoeducation. It's like a simple peer-to-peer intervention. And as I said, this is the physical training that I was talking about, based on biology. Yeah.
Because that allows people who think there is or have an idea of stigma about mental health issues to focus on the physical first, and then
it's like the bottom up.
Bottom up approach. I'm also intrigued to know, in the 4 years since you've left Syria, you learned English, German.
Yes, I can speak English and German. Yes.
And how do you feel, if I may ask, just for someone who's been through so much, walked across Europe, saw so much violence and injury, and has been through so much and is now taking a lead? How do you feel in yourself, and where do you get that strength from?
This is, I just, even 3 days ago actually, I celebrated my birthday by speaking on this important issue in The Hague. So, because for me, this is what I say, this support changed my life. And as I said, and this is also my message to the people who see me as only like a traumatized refugee, and tell them, oh, look at me now. I'm no longer just a victim. Instead, I'm a person with skills and expertise to support my community. So I think this is what gives me like strength. And I think we should also think about the people who are like, in some countries there are refugees who like attempted suicide, and because there is no psychosocial support provided, we should think also about the people who are like in detention centers, who don't have access to health. And me in my role here, it's not like I'm supporting refugees only in Germany. I'm really happy that I can even support people in conflict areas over Skype, like counseling over Skype, even online counseling, and even I do online trainings. So it's not only for refugees in Germany.
So, I mean, I think everyone here has made the case about the importance of psychosocial support, but and treatment of mental health. But if I could ask each of you, what is it you would like to see now? Where are the commonalities between experiences and practice in other countries that maybe each country could benefit from? Are you hearing anything in what the other person is saying on these panel that makes you think, yeah, maybe this is something we should think about doing? Who do you go to? Who do you want to hear your message? If you like.
Okay, so maybe I'll draw on the challenges that we faced in Lebanon doing this work, and I'll talk about 3 specific points that were crucial. The first one is the clear lack of funding of MHPSS within the humanitarian sector, because it's very diluted, you cannot track it, you don't know where it's going and what's being done with it.
And why is that?
It's because of the funding mechanisms in place already that exist. And what we were able to do is really connect with other sectors, mainly the education sector and the protection sector, sexual and gender-based violence protection sector. And we were able to find intersections between their work and our work and move them more towards implementing specific strategy. The second challenge is also related to funds, but it's a bit of a different nature, is how do you transition from humanitarian funding to development funding? Because the humanitarian funding is not necessarily built for long term. Crises are no longer 6 months or 1 year. We're talking about 10 to 15 years. So you need to have already a development lens. And so how do you move from humanitarian to development funding? And the way we were able to do this, first, actually, at the initial stages of the program, IMC helped us a bit institutionally, then UNICEF for about 2 years. Then their funding got cut, and we got cut from one day to the other. then we shifted to project-based funding to continue the work. So we would take projects to fund part of the work that is needed for the humanitarian and use the same human resources to implement objectives and the strategy, which was double work. Everyone got exhausted. And recently, now, with our discussions, we got actually support from the French Agency for Development that they were convinced about the importance of investing in mental health, and also one foundation, Bernard Van Leer, who both of them agreed to support system strengthening component, kind of what we'd like to call catalytical funding. You need some funding initially given to a structure, to a mechanism that will be able to scale up services. Without this fund, nothing would really happen. If we keep on just funding interventions per se, we cannot build system. And the last point, that wasn't particularly a challenge for us in Lebanon, but it can be for other contexts, is the importance of having a really well-resourced, big enough, qualified team, because it needs qualified people. The idea or the message is that you need one person in the Ministry of Health or in the Ministry of Social Affairs and then you can reform a system. It doesn't fly. This is not the reality. And this costs money, but also the return of investment for really reforming a mental health system, I think the economical case for it is really, really strong. So my take for it is that we need to ask for more money for MHPSS because the return on investment is important, and we need to have long-term vision and develop and system strengthening.
Marit.
Yes, well, from a researcher's perspective, I also would plea for more funding of good research. So the last 10 years have been very exciting times in the field of global mental health. We've seen a lot of high-quality randomized clinical trials coming into journals with high impact and also showing very positive effects of what we're doing about evidence-based mental health care interventions, that they really do have a positive effect also in humanitarian settings. And that was something we didn't know before, actually. I think it's very important that we continue to invest in these studies because we're not there yet. We have other research gaps to close. For instance, we do have, I'm quite confident actually, that we do have good interventions to address common mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorders. But we can do better in terms of preventing suicide, addressing substance abuse disorders.
Through implementation of research.
Right. I think we should do it together. We should, as researchers, as academic institutions, together with NGOs and also with local organizations such as refugee organizations, we should together build up this evidence for mental health.
How big a challenge is this? Because we often hear that researchers are working across the world on one particular topic or disease or subject, and often in silos. I mean, how aware are you of other researchers' work in this field? And is it a close-knit community? Is it a community?
Well, the research community of research in humanitarian settings is actually quite of a nice community, and many people actually collaborating with us within Strengths are here also today in the public. So I must say that I'm actually specifically fond of being part of this research community, and we try as much as possible not to be siloed.
And the next step then, once your research is proven, is implementation. And how do you choose which countries it might, or communities it might be more suited to? One particular research project.
Implementation is a very complicated process, and currently we do face a lot of barriers to implementation. And I think that research should also be focused on how we can take away these barriers for implementation. We are now actually noticing that for some reason it's easier to implement our task-sharing interventions like PM+, into countries such as Lebanon or Turkey, whereas it's very complicated to do that, for instance, in high-income settings such as Germany and also in the Netherlands, and that's very challenging.
That might be a whole other panel discussion in itself. But I see both of you making notes as we've been listening to Rabia and Marit talking. I mean, how does research, how much do you depend on research projects, external research projects, for the work that you're doing?
Okay, we did research ourselves, my foundation, in the 1916, and we find the same result, that they are telling about this. It's 1 out of 5 people needs kind of psychological help, and this is and that was 2016. Now I am sure after 5 years, almost 5 years of war, it's creating this. This is it's raising. What I want to say that for those countries and world organizations who are helping Yemen with humanitarian aid to consider mental health also, because it's related to the war. As they give food, they give medical staff, they give cash assistance, and this is very important. But also mental health and treatment and getting medicine, psychological medicine, is very important. For my foundation, we have a shortage in psychological medicine. We get rid of the stigma that everybody is talking about. The stigma, it's a big barrier in all societies. For my foundation, we help to reduce the stigma, and people are calling to us. We have in 5 years, only 5 years, we served 131,000 of people through our helpline. 80% of them are female. 19% are under the age of 18, and 35 of them are GBV cases. We have also clinics. We serve daily, in daily basis, we serve more than 100 every day. They come to our clinic, and we can just provide 65 people with psychological medicine because we don't have the funds for this.
So you're pushing back a tide,
yes,
really, of
and
this.
you cannot imagine that people come from villages and remote area to our foundation, and they are waiting in the street for 3 hours until we open the gate at 8 a.m. because they know only 65 people are allowed to receive medicine per day. And
so
sometimes, if this person supposed to take the medicine for 4 months or 6 months, because of the shortage of medicine, we give him 3 months, and then he relapse again, and then he needs to start over another 6 months. So this is big issue. There is a great need for psychological medicine in Yemen.
So prescription medicine is needed. Yes. I'd like in the remaining few minutes, if I could, to throw the questions open to the floor. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. And while you're maybe thinking about a question in the remaining minutes, I'd like to go to Ananda, because I'm wondering, as Rabia was talking, you must be comparing and contrasting what he has to say about what's happening in Lebanon.
Absolutely. In some ways incredibly, how to say, envious of the position, but also admiring of what you've managed. But I think what I'd like to say is that in context where perhaps there's a greater degree of fragility in terms of governance, of the nature of conflicts, that we maybe need to think that sometimes the work is not ever quite done. That we have cycles of conflict and peace, of stability and crisis, and some of that requires sustained engagement. And I think what I would say is the thing that we need desperately is real good quality partnerships, sometimes between affected communities and helpers, between governments and their international partners, between sort of thoughtful and sustained engagement from donors in terms of navigating the particular challenges that come over time in a particular context to ensure that what we invest in terms of providing services for people who need it is sustained through these ups and downs of the history that impacts on people's well-being.
Just maybe a note on that specifically, and just to link it on the importance of, when possible, really to engage with national and local government and to strengthen the system in place and not to build parallel systems, because governments are there to stay. And when possible, ethically and logistically, it's also the best thing to do.
And I would, if you don't mind, I'm sorry.
Your hands can start going.
Ultimately, what what matters are local processes, I would say.
Process.
And local processes and local stakeholders are what's going to carry things through when everyone else has left. So I think that's where you invest in.
Any questions? Please, microphones should be heading your way now. How about the lady here in the front row with her hand up? And if you just could quickly just give your name, your organization, and we'll take your question. And then if you could keep your hand up, and then we can go with you to a second microphone so we can be ready quickly with another question.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Norwu Howard. I'm from Liberia, Deputy Minister of Health, and my question is for Dr. Jabari. Is the government in any way assisting in this effort in Yemen? It seems like you're doing a great job and you need a lot of assistance. Do they have a budget, or do they have, are they making any efforts to assist foundations like yours?
Okay.
It's about.
Okay. No, there is no involvement for the government in mental health issues. Not just now from the war, even before the war. Governments, they don't take care of mental health issues at all. And I will take this chance to thank Netherlands government, because it is the first country that supports a project in psychosocial in Yemen. So, and we are the only NGO that working with mental health illnesses. It's because it's for free in the whole country. I want you also to know that we don't have enough specialists in Yemen. Only 44 psychiatrists in the whole country. Can you imagine that? That indicate that one psychiatrist for 600,000 people. Okay, and on the mental health services only in 5 governorates out of 23 governorates, which means people cannot have this kind of service. Furthermore, we have 128,000 localities, and this is make it more difficult to be reached. This is why the helpline is a good idea, that we can throw the helpline, reach all of these people. We have 50% of our calls comes from all over the country, even from the island. It's Socotra Island. We have a few calls. Right. And the other 50 are from the capital. And can you imagine that a suicidal case that they cannot get any help? So through our helpline, just in 2019, we have prevented 780 people suicide case. 260 of them committed a suicide attempt for 1 to 3 times. 100 of them, they tried to harm themselves 100 times.
So these are
50 of them are because of forced marriage, and the other 160 is because of domestic violence. And these people, they cannot get help at all. We never heard about suicidal cases before the war. It was rarely that we heard in newspaper and something. Even as a foundation, we have been working for 9 years. We didn't have lots of suicidal cases before the war. Now it's a lot of suicidal.
Any questions for anybody, any of the other panelists? Just, I'm very conscious of time. If we go to this lady at the back here with the glasses, thank you very much.
My name's Dr. Lynn Jones. I'm a child psychiatrist. I've been working in conflict areas and disaster areas for a few years. I have a question to any member of the panel, but maybe particularly Ananda and Rabi. We've talked a lot about how crisis has addressed people with traumatic problems. I'm interested, my own experience of going into such situations is you get an opportunity to go into institutions and see people who have never, the most stigmatized group, those with severe mental disorders who've not got good quality care. In your own experience, how much has crisis psychiatry enabled the better care of the institutionalized or the severely neglected patients with severe mental disorders? Do you think it's improved things for them?
Thank you.
Well, it would be a resounding yes, I think, from the Sri Lankan experience. In terms of, initially, I think we had a lot of, we had very sort of, I would say, a sort of a archaic, very institutionalized approach to provision of services, with a couple of very large sort of asylums where people would go for treatment for quite an extended period of time. Due to the needs that arose in the context of the conflict and the war, we saw some quite heroic mental health professionals start doing work using new approaches that were much more community-based, especially in the conflict-affected areas. And then when we had an opportunity around the time of the tsunami, we had a coming together of strategic support from international partners, WHO, some of those mental health professionals, to actually bring about a national mental health policy that shifted services out of those few kind of major hospitals to district-level general services. And a number of different groups were involved in training primary health service providers to provide mental health services to people with disorders where they lived or close to where they lived. And I think that had a tremendous effect in terms of increasing access to treatment and a better quality of treatment and outcomes for them.
Thank you. Question?
Maybe
Question?
Just a
we're going to run very quickly at a time.
I'll tell you in the break, Lynn.
That would be ideal. Any questions for anybody else on the panel who might have spoken? Yes, this gentleman here towards the back with his hand up. Yeah, if you could. Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, actually, I meant the gentleman in front, but then you'll be next. Okay.
Hello. Kelly O'Donnell, psychologist, World Federation for Mental Health. Actually, a quick question for Rabbi. The Agenda for Humanity from the World Humanitarian Summit, one of the outcome documents, the first of the 5 core commitments had to do with political leadership to prevent and end conflicts. And because of your experience, I'm wondering if you could just maybe quickly give us an update on how relevant is that, and how much is that really being taken to heart at some of the highest levels? So it's not just about Band-Aids, we know, but how do we really help prevent the conflicts and end them in the first place as a way to support our MHPSS efforts?
I think that's more of a question to the UN Secretary General, actually. I mean, preventing... I don't know how to, but I'm definitely sure that if we prevent conflict, it's the best solution for MHPSS of people.
Yes, this lady here, please, if we could have a microphone. Maybe if we can speed it up, I'll take a couple more questions, I think, before lunch. I know there are a lot of people with their hands up. If we could just maybe be ready with a microphone for the next person who wants to speak. This gentleman, yeah. But first, this lady, if you don't mind. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Rosemary Bustani from Beirut, Lebanon, and I'm very happy to be here. And I've heard a lot and felt a lot listening to all of you. There are many stakeholders in this. There are multiple ministries, as you have pointed out. For Lebanon, it's social service, education, health, mental health. Universities, academic centers are not stressed enough because they come to us for aid. But there's someone you left out, and they have the big bucks, and that is pharma. And we exploit them at the university to do awareness campaigns and to provide medications for free. And we have many examples for that. So they should be part of the family that addresses this, because they can fund a lot of it.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll have to take this one.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So pharma is a big debate in health in general, right? What happened, and I'm going to give a specific example before saying my personal position and the position of the ministry as well. So when the conflict started, a lot of pharma came and gave state-of-the-art new medication, in-kind donations, right? That lasted for 4 months, and when this was out of stock, the people were left with no medication, and there was no real evidence that these medications were of a higher value of the essential drug list of WHO that's affordable and accessible. That's one example. A second example, one of the pharma that had a long-acting antipsychotic depot that cost around $5 suddenly disappeared from the market because the new antipsychotic medication that costed $400 was available. Third, lithium at some point became non-profitable, for pharma, so they decided to sell it to another company, and we almost ran out of lithium, which we know is crucial for people with bipolar disorder. So my personal take on this is, up till now, I don't think pharma is really ready to genuinely engage and have a discussion about all of that. What they want to do is a different agenda. So when they go to countries, the first thing they want to do is test their newest drugs. So up till now, I don't think pharma should be on the equation unless a full, clear discussion led by WHO specifically happens that clarify the rules of engagement. Up until then, I think pharma should stay out of the equation.
Okay. To be continued. I'm sorry. We can next. This gentleman with the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Matrika Devkota. I'm from Nepal. It's an organization called COSISTA, people with lived experience. And I have a question with general question with all of you. Do you also think that importance of peer support, like my experience is not to make things so complicated and to be non-judgmental, empathy, and psychosocial support can be solved through the also non-specialized ways through the peer support. Do you agree? Do you have any experiences? Thank you.
I think so. Can I answer to this question?
Absolutely.
I think the question is, it's very complicated to provide mental health and psychosocial support in terms of being empathetic, peer support. Well, that is indeed very challenging, and people will be using a training of 8 days for Problem Management Plus to be able to provide peer support, and they will also be continuously supervised during the process. But we do know that actually, recently a study has been published showing that in Pakistan, where there's also a peer support program, Thinking Healthy program for mothers with maternal depression, it has been shown that even after 5 years' time, people were still having very good skills, peer support trainers, and even 70% of the people who were initially trained were still being lay counselors or peer support.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I think we're well over time already, 20 minutes, and I know those who've made lunch won't thank me for it sitting out. But please continue the discussion in your lunch break. There are breakout sessions in the afternoon, but again, only if you're registered, because they're fully booked. And again, Connect and Exchange is in the basement the entire afternoon. I would like to thank, and please join me in thanking everybody here for their contributions today. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
I think that could have gone.